Hello.
Hey.
Are we supposed to say this in like a podcast voice or something?
What is a podcast voice?
Hello, or something like that? No?
No.
No? Anyway, this is 24th episode of Biweeklycast. The hosts are here, regardless of the podcast voice, I guess. My name is Dima Malenko.
I'm Slava Rudnitsky, and today it's a book club episode, but before we get to an actual book, there is a follow-up.
Yes. It may seem to some people that I kind of keep making mistakes so that I have something to say in the follow-up, but I guess in the last episode when we were discussing transition from old safety posters on the tube to the new safety posters on the tube, I made a mistake saying that this was the same artist that produced the new set of posters. I'm not sure what gave me that idea, but apparently it was wrong. Previous set of posters was designed by designer creative agency called La Boca, and the new ones that are currently all over the tube now were designed by Andrew Hudson, who is also an artist, but as far as I can tell, he has no connection to La Boca, so I stand corrected on that one.
Do you still like them, though?
They are
okay.
Yeah, they are passable, I guess.
All right. We can let the tube keep them for a little while.
I don't think we have any options other than that.
Well, only some minor criminal activities that could get you fined, maybe arrested if you keep doing that.
I was thinking of where I could get one of those older posters, and as far as I could see, I was not able to find any place to buy them. There were some on eBay of all places, but they didn't have the one that I wanted to get. I wanted to get the slow down one, but they didn't have it.
All right, then let's probably slow down while discussing the book of Courage to be Disliked. And probably we should start with a little why are we discussing this book?
I guess because we both read/listened to that book, isn't that?
Yeah, but why did we do that in the first place?
I think because I told us to do that.
Why do you think you told us to do that?
I don't know. Like some time ago, I came across this book, and it was. I want to say it was quite a time ago, and also I want to say that at that time it seemed to me that this book was quite a hype at that moment, because I think I remember hearing from multiple sources or people about this book, and I also remember that was the ground for me to kind of discard and dismiss this book, because I thought, well, that's like a new hotness, like everyone's talking about this, like how great that is, and so on and so forth. Like just the next Simon Sinek, Simon, I'm sorry, or something like this. And I remember deciding that, yeah, I would not even try to read this book, to get this book to read or listen to it. But then something changed, and I got this book on Audible, and I listened to it, and it was quite interesting and intriguing, and that's how we ended up listening/reading this book for this book club, more or less, I think.
Yeah, I did finish it, and I also listened to it on Audible. But as far as I know, you've also listened to the other book, or it's like the second edition.
The second book is called Courage to be Happy, and I also read/listened to that one.
All right, so probably for people who haven't listened or read this book, you could either stop now because, well, what's the point of listening? But if you are still here, a little overview. I think that the weird thing is that the style of the book is the dialogue of two people. And even in the audiobook, they all played it with like a kid or a youth.
Right.
A philosopher / psychologist / narrator / like all other roles. There was also a lady, but she appeared every now and then. And I found it weird. I mean, the style of this conversation, because previously most of the dialogue-based books were either fiction or something religious. And it got me suspicious. Like, it was kind of hard to get through the first chapters because it kind of reminded me a lot of this yoga guru and Buddhist dialogue stuff. And I haven't read any other dialogue-based books apart from that.
Right. Yeah, that was an interesting part. So the setting of the book is the youth, and I think he's definitely not a kid because he's got a job. He graduated from university or something. So he's definitely not a kid. And the setting is that youth regularly comes to philosophers' study, and they kind of talk about different challenges or problems or ideas that youth has, and the philosopher tries to teach the youth in the ways of, well, I guess we'll get to that, of Adlerian psychology. And I think like I was going to share exactly the same remark. I kind of did not really appreciate the style, the dialogue-based style of the book. I felt like it gets in the way in multiple ways. I think one is that it's relatively difficult to follow in audiobook. I imagine like reading that might be a bit easier because there's I checked the quote unquote check the book or checked previews of the book. They I think it's set like almost like a play, so it's relatively easier to distinguish between who's saying what, more or less, and maybe reading it might be a bit easier from understanding and following point of view, but in audiobook format it was not as great. But I think they tried to mimic the Plato dialogues kind of thing. I think they said that. I haven't read or listened to Plato, so I cannot imagine how that one would go, but this one, yeah, I agree with you that the style was not great.
And I think that basically this Plato analogy is pretty much it as far as they got to the philosophy. But you named this, I don't know, the other actor or the other side, a philosopher. Do you find any similarities in terms of philosophy? Because to me, it sounds more like a psychologist, to be honest. The author kind of names this person a philosopher, but there are not so many remarks or any concepts that were highlighted there. So to me, it didn't sound like a philosophical book, just purely psychological.
I guess we are risking getting into the weeds of kind of definitions and arguing about what's philosophy, what's psychology. I think to me it doesn't seem too far of a stretch to call this guy a philosophy, because a philosopher, just because it feels to me, it more than anything like feels to me that some of the ideas are kind of philosophical ideas, like we all live in the present, that there is no past, no future, and this kind of shapes the rest of the things, and then they have several they offer several kind of key ideas and work out and derive some of the other things from that, which I think is at least part, or maybe just a resemblance of philosophical methods. So I think I would be personally, I'd be fine with both ways. But you say that you don't like this?
I think we don't have to focus on the terms. I will just probably use words like mentor and mentee in this case because it seems a bit more appropriate to me. Because what they used there was something like unconditional friend or counselor or
chancellor. Yeah.
None of those rings the bell. So
that one was really nice. I kind of like that phrase. They also the mentor called his guest irreplaceable friend, which I thought was a nice touch. Maybe I'll make a note of this word because maybe I will have an opportunity to use this to convey some ideas.
So how would you like to approach the discussion? Like, should we go through the key concepts or?
Maybe that's what I thought. Like, at first I wanted to talk about the style of the book, and we kind of both didn't like the dialogue-based structure of the book. One other reason why I didn't quite appreciate the dialogue-based structure in this case, even though I think, remember we read Lao Tao Te Ching or something along those lines? Was it also dialogue, or was it not?
Nope. Those were poems, like
those were
separate.
But there weren't there another book that we read that also was dialogue-based? Maybe not. Okay, so like anyway, I think I may have read some other book which is sort of dialogue-based, but that one, at least in my memory, was very fragmented. So it was like a question and answer and then a little bit of discussion of that particular question with no particular relation or connection between different parts or different chapters in the book. And I think here authors kind of tried to have a linear structure, more or less linear narrative to how you like this week they came and discussed this, but then they meet again next week and something like this. I also felt like that this kind of something is not quite effective there, because with this narration you kind of expect character like those two people, two characters to sort of develop in a more or less a way that would resemble a fiction book, but at the same time the questions or aspects of that Adlerian psychology that they discuss requires more than one perspective, more than one view on them, and just having one person questioning the ideas didn't seem to do full justice to explaining the concepts in an all-rounded manner.
I can assume why they did that. Probably because it is kind of related to a lot of psychological work, and there is a list of frequently asked questions or frequently made complaints about the method. So they just put them all together into the list and somehow split them across the thing. But what I appreciated that they were basically introducing concepts one by one. And some of them were interesting, some of them were some of them were actually useful. So for me, it was like a lottery. Like you would never know whether the next chapter will bring something nice or something not so nice.
Interesting. Yeah, let's maybe dive into that. I tried to put a list of some of the key concepts. That's definitely not an exhaustive list. Maybe we can remember some more as we talk about them. I'm not sure if this one was the first, but it feels to me that it was one of the first. The idea of feeling of inferiority and our kind of innate drive to fight that and then kind of fight for superiority.
I think in the first chapter they kind of mixed up a number of things, including this interpersonal relationship, and also there was a bit of lifestyle that probably you mentioned, but in a different word.
So there was this thing, and I think that they discussed a little bit that our current world and current environment is such that we are all driven to strive for achievement, and because of that we have a tendency to compare ourselves against others. That leads to feelings of inferiority and all kind of sort of challenges and problems connected to that. That was one thing. I don't remember where they said about the next one. Like I think they use these words precisely. All problems are interpersonal relationship problems. So that was the next one. But maybe before we jump to that, the first one, the drive for achievement and feeling of inferiority. What are your thoughts on that? Is it useful?
I think this is just a very long way of phrasing one of these psychological concepts, I'm okay, you're okay, when basically they would like you to have the mindset that you are fine and you don't have to compete with others, and other people are also fine and they are not actually competing with you. They don't care about you mostly, and if they do, it's their problem. So there is no competition in life on average. And there was a very long discussion between this mentor and mentee, or youth and the philosopher, around that. I think a bit too long, but well, let it be. I wasn't really moved or really got into this feeling of inferiority or superiority. And what was your take? Like, how did you perceive it?
I think I found this idea and how they discuss it kind of interesting from the perspective of that all of us are kind of social creatures, and to an extent we are product of the society we live in. And if society as a whole or on average exerts certain forces on us or kind of pushes certain expectations, it's only natural that affects us, the way how we see ourselves, how we see the world, and those ways may not always be productive or beneficial for us and as individuals. And I think I found this kind of whole discussion of this feeling of inferiority, comparing someone to others and thus striving to achieve achievements, kind of resonating a little bit with me. So I kind of liked these. In general, I kind of liked initial chapters of the book somewhat better than the later ones.
Well, in terms of feeling of inferiority, I think that might be a big issue for a bigger issue for younger generations when they're like looking for themselves and striving to find their place. And that's why they illustrated the person who came with the defense of this competitive lifestyle as a youngster, and the philosopher who kind of has seen it all was just like there's no competition, nobody wins, nobody loses. In fact, there is some kind of competition, but you don't have to psychologically get into it. And I really like this concept of blue ocean strategy, and the idea that if you are not comfortable competing and playing by these rules, you can always reinvent the rules or change the situation and just move elsewhere and create something that has never existed, because oceans are over there, just go and use them. But apart from that, I think that the discussion around superiority, that people try to look superior, that there are a lot of things around that, and even when people are not confident or afraid of something, this is still a strategy how to get more superior or to feel superior. And as for me, that was a bit over detailized. I don't know. I kind of wanted to move on to the next one, and when we did move to this interpersonal relationship problem, it kind of got more interesting.
I think that I remembered one more thing that I had in mind when listening to through that part of the book, and it's not directly related to the feeling of inferiority, but rather to related idea of you are okay or fine as you are, and like you don't necessarily need to be better just because kind of on the background of others, you look one way or the other. I still relatively vividly remember. You probably can call it a cultural shock from my first long trip to the US, when I kind of was impressed by how in day-to-day interactions I received kind of respect from other people for just being a human being. And I'll try to explain. Like I think still to this day in Ukraine, it's not very common that if you come into an elevator with that other person, you have any sort of interaction with them. Like they can turn away or you can turn away, and you just happen to coincidentally be sharing same block of space, and then like you you rise up to the 7th floor or something like this. But in the US, it's very common that when you go into the elevator with a complete stranger, they would acknowledge that, hey, I hear you, you're like a human being, you say hi, or just smile to each other. But there is this element of acknowledgement and sort of appreciation and respect for you just being a human being next to another human being. That was something that I didn't experience much, at least at that time, from where I was coming from. And I was sort of impressed by this, and this kind of feeling of inferiority discussion, and especially that bit about being okay as you are, kind of reminded me of that impression that I get from my first trip to the US.
For me, it's like a confirmation bias, because when you were talking about this, I also remembered some examples or cases when people were respectful and considerate when other people were in. Like, I was working in this entertainment park, making snacks on the street, and there would be a group of punks or rock teenagers who were very noisy and loud. But when they would come to the restaurant or cafe, they would be, "Hello, yes, please, could you?" When they were in the public area or section, they were nice, and then they would just leave and start swearing or behaving the way they would normally do in their group or in the environment. But at the same time, I've seen a lot of cases when I think that people were not really thinking that someone is fine, and that was later described in the book about the praise. By the way, I don't fully agree with this statement of the authors, but still, the concept that somebody can feel superior to you, like, oh, you're like a kid, or hey, you're just a Ukrainian, or something along those lines. And I feel this superior position in many conversations and in many situations. And I don't think that the US feels very different in terms of the mindset here. And that's why this book is not the most popular and not a go-to tool for now, unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Like, everyone's mileage varies. And this was just my first impression that the discussion in the book was re-inspired in me, and that's why maybe it connected with me a little bit more than it did with you.
So the second point that they introduced there was this interpersonal relationship issues, and that most things that feel uncomfortable or bring you the irritation or stress or something are usually related to other people. Even if you think that you're stressed about yourself, it's usually somehow connected to your fear of being ignored, offended, insulted, attacked, or anything else by someone else, or fear of rejection. And actually, the book named Courage to Be Disliked, I think, is a lot about this section or this part, this concept of interpersonal relationship problem. I generally agree with this idea. But again, I was probably previously thinking about internal and external point of reference. Like, when you think about your actions, do you care what other people would think or do about your actions, or do you care what you think about something? Because sometimes I'm quite dependable on feedback, especially about some new stuff and complicated things. And when I don't get supportive feedback or even mixed feedback, it kind of it's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And this book kind of suggests that it doesn't really matter what other people think.
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly just about you and what you think and what is your task. But I think I'm still jumping to the next concept too fast.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think even in the book itself, they admit that even though they introduce those ideas kind of sequentially, because like there is no other way to do that by and large, that they still admit that at least some of them are part and parcel of a bigger construct, and they need to be considered together. So it's only natural that we jump between them here and then. I think I would also agree with you. Maybe that doesn't make for a very interesting discussion if we if we both agree with each other. But I do agree with you on this one. I kind of felt about this particular point. I kind of felt that this is kind of a refreshing idea, right? That you don't need to think about what other people think, and like first and foremost, maybe you need to be okay with what you're doing, and you are the judge in the case in the case here, and then the examples they went through to kind of illustrate or look at this idea from different view angles was also quite interesting. But I also agree with you that there is more to it than that, right? Because you cannot. They say that one does not want to be driven by what other people would think about him. But what if I'm thinking about what they're going to think about what I do? Like if like back and forth again, like it's me thinking about what they think about what I do. Is it me again? Like, is it if I stop at this level of iteration, is it okay? Like, is it not being driven by what others think, and so on and so forth? And we can continue this ping pong back and forth like to infinity. And I guess that their idea is that the long tail of this ping ponging is not really relevant at first. Maybe they probably go as far as saying like the very first hop, like the you yourself, is the most important part, and then the rest of it is just a thing that just unfolds, and you maybe deal with it as it goes, or something like that.
The youth in the book was using the word hypocrisy quite a lot. And I think this is where this hypocrisy actually is, because they kind of reject the empathy and consideration by saying this, like you shouldn't really care what other people think about your actions. And then a bit later in the community feeling section or concept, they say like, well, actually, you'll be happy only if you serve to others. And your service should be useful, like you should actually be of use. You're worth if you're useful to others. And how can you actually know that you're useful to others if you don't consider their ideas, thoughts, feedback, needs, and other things? This is where they kind of lost me, because the concept of community feeling kind of ruins this first part, that everyone should live in their separate world, and the perfect Adlerian way would be the single-person universe.
Interesting. I guess I didn't quite thought about it this way. I thought my perception of it, or at least the what I took away and what I ran with from that part of discussion, was that this departure from what others think primarily relates to departure from their judgmental thinking, and that feeling of, well, something that would inspire that feeling of superiority or inferiority. This is how I took this part. I don't think I really took it to mean complete departure from understanding other people and taking into account
Well, the message was you shouldn't really care about that because that's not relevant, that's not important, that's not your job, basically, it's not your task. And back here, I think that one of the difficulties I've had that for the first sections, the mentor or the philosopher was teaching the youth not to be superior, not to go into judgments. And then when there was the discussion about the community feeling and the youngster was questioning this part, the philosopher actually got quite superior, like, you haven't understood community feeling yet, or you don't fully know something. There was a lot of judgment in that part of the book. And I was like, wait a second, aren't you supposed to be like, I'm okay, you're okay, without any superiority or inferiority in the conversation? And it felt, again, a bit hypocritical. Yeah.
Interesting. I guess the way you describe it kind of makes sense. I'm trying to deconstruct how I didn't quite spot that. I guess maybe I didn't like something in the later parts of the book where they discuss community feeling and stuff. Kind of didn't sit quite right with me. I was not able to exactly pinpoint what was that, and maybe that thing was something like it. Of course, on the surface, that philosopher maybe could defend themselves by saying, "Hey, I was not judging the youth. I was merely pointing out the fact that they haven't seemed to fully grasp a community feeling thing."
But then, like later in the first chapters, he says, like, you shouldn't praise anyone, and then, oh, now you're getting faster. Like, you're getting the concepts much better. Like, you shouldn't praise, man. Like, it was chapter 2.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like the one of the ideas here, and that's related to that one. How did they say one should not praise, one should not rebuke, or something along those lines? And that's related to idea of separation of tasks that they introduced. Right, you are sort of free to do what you think you should be doing, and that's for other people then to decide what they think about that, and that's their task and their quote-unquote problem. You should not care about that, or at least you should not worry about that too much.
And I generally agree with the concept or with the mindset, but then, like, I see a very healthy part about taking responsibility over your actions and not putting responsibility of your actions to others, or like not shifting the responsibility. But then when I think about this feedback part, like, you shouldn't say anything critical or anything nice about actions of other people because it feels superior, kind of gets broken across the everyday life. Like when you, I don't know, work with someone in a team, there has to be feedback there, because if you don't, you're just a group of individual contributors. You don't collaborate, actually. And I like the concept, like everyone should do their job and, if possible, help each other doing this job better.
Right.
All right, but how do you do that if someone is wrong? Like if there is a mistake or if there is a risk for something? Without rebuking or without... I can probably imagine that what they were saying is that you shouldn't praise, meaning you shouldn't just compliment a person, but discuss the activities and the actions. Not the person, like, oh, well done, like, you did great, but rephrase it into, like, this is useful, like, or this section is well designed. But still, like, every time you come to any descriptor, like well designed, it's automatically kind of supportive feedback or praise, and it's really hard to fill this line.
Right, and once again, I kind of agree with that, because the feedback, the praise, or what's the noun for rebuke? I have no idea. Rebuking, whatever. I don't know.
Corrections.
Corrections. Yeah, corrective feedback. It it is a complicated thing, right? We can send each other so many different signals in so many different forms, and with some of them we can't just avoid sending those signals, right? If you, as in the example you gave, if you have two potential collaborators, there would be a situation where you cannot, like, in principle, you cannot work with both of them. You would have to choose one, and that can be seen as a signal of appreciation or praise. Like, I want to work with you on this one just because I maybe think that together we can get more done in this particular area or something along those lines. But then I guess we can invoke this separation of task and kind of call it that, well, that's for other people to decide how they interpret it, and we cannot interfere with that task. And if they interpret this as a praise, that is too bad for them, right? They have not seen the light of Adlerian psychology, I guess, maybe.
And at this part, they kind of lost me because it was like a tipping point.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I collected too many inconsistencies, and I really liked some of the concepts, but the way they were explained, and especially because it was the live speech, and I could see elements of praise or elements of rebuke or elements of not separating the tasks in the conversation about separating the tasks. I was like, whoa. If you can't actually craft a text that is based according to all those principles and concepts, then what's the point of using this style at the first place?
Interesting. I sort of once again I agree with this point. But now I have to wonder if it has anything to do with the translation itself. Could it have been that in Japanese, which I think the original language of the book, it was framed and phrased and worded or hieroglyphed in a way that has more nuance, if that's possible. So maybe some of the words they have in Japanese are such that those sorts of feedback that the philosopher provided to the youth were not exactly considered as praise or rebuking, but that nuance may have been lost in translation or something like that. That's quite interesting.
That is a possibility. But it still doesn't resolve this issue. It does resolve the issue about rebuking and praising.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing about community feeling and avoiding interpersonal relationship problems is still kind of there. I can't really put these two concepts together. And here I kind of remembered, I think we discussed Stephen Covey's book about the 7 habits of highly effective people.
Yep. I'm not sure if we did this on the podcast. Maybe in some of the early episodes, like very early episodes.
I think it was in the very, very early episodes. And Stephen Covey was also mentioned as one of the followers of Adlerian psychology in this book. And the idea there was that you basically at first invest into your independence, and then you move to interdependence, and you kind of avoid the state of being dependent to someone. I think that it's the shortest and the clearest way that they probably tried to convey here, that you do your best, you do your job, you like what you are, and just enjoy being who you are. And by doing that, you can interact with others without creating the issues. But then the mechanics here still was kind of wishy-washy.
I think that they used the idea, the way they expressed this idea was that one of one's life tasks is being self-reliant or something along those lines, right? So that's the idea of independence. But that's interesting in a sense that I'm still sort of puzzled by how I didn't see those inconsistencies or haven't noticed them as much. Maybe that's because just in general, I think I have a tendency to kind of interpret things kind of in a way that, like, if you say X and then something that has to follow X, I sort of allow it to go through if kind of there is a plausible way for the derived thing to be consistent with X. It might not be entirely based on X, that there might be things that it goes one way or the other, but if to some degree of approximation it kind of follows or is consistent with X, I kind of let it slide. But definitely there can be moments where I would also be kind of a bit more picky, and I think I need to take this as a lesson and be a bit more, I don't know, critical or more attentive to stuff as it flows.
Do you happen to remember how long you were listening to the book?
I did it twice, one the first time and the second one before the podcast. In general, I have a tendency to listen to books, not in one sitting, but on the course of maybe several days or a week, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I think that might be the reason, because I was basically pausing. We picked the book about a month ago or something, and I had plenty of time to listen to it, but I still finished it like 6 or 5 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it took me 3 weeks, because I would stop after every concept and let it digest and sink in. And as I was trying to build up the system of the concepts and the rules, I kind of thought I understood, especially the separation of task.
Mm-hmm.
And this feeling of inferiority. They were the first ones, so they were easier to engage with. And then when in the book, in the text, I could see that some of those concepts or rules were violated by one of the characters, it kind of felt like, I don't know, like, are you sure you're a mentor and you teach how to do this sort of things? But I'm sure that I probably wouldn't be able to do it if I were listening to it like on the speed run, like if I listened to it for a week nonstop, like every day, a few hours. Probably it wouldn't process that well.
Yeah, it's good. This is it's a good point. So, like, listeners, take note when you read books or listen to them. Take time to pause and think and let the ideas sink in and digest, so that you can come more enriched and enlightened to subsequent episodes of the book. Yeah, that's a good idea.
But not for every book, right?
Well, for some books, right? Here, I think in general, maybe I'm somewhat used to the idea of having things that are similar to like North Stars or something like that, like unattainable ideal, which nonetheless sets the direction, and we try to go that direction as best as we can, one step at a time. And maybe with this book, when they introduced those different things, I took them to mean more of a direction rather than very precise and direct instruction on how to do things, and that's why I didn't necessarily caught some of the items, some of the inconsistencies, even internal inconsistencies that you highlight. But as you do,
I think that's totally fine, because the book is quite generic, and if people leave after reading with one idea or one insight that is helpful and that can change their life to better and, I don't know, let's say happier being, why not? Like, that totally works. I think I mostly have this issue when people suggest a method of something, like basically a way of thinking or an approach. They question a lot of things in your life. They say like, well, there is no drama, there is no trauma, like it doesn't impact you at all. Like, all right. I can suggest that it might be right. Let's see how it goes. And then as it unfolds, you try to build it up as a system. Because if it's just a set of tools, a set of instruments like practices, that's breathing activity, that's meditation, that's jogging, you can do them whenever you'd like. But they're not together. They're not like a philosophy or a concept that has to support and maintain each other. They're just random activities, and each and every one of them is useful. And this is what happens here. Like community feeling, should people care about the community and others? Yes, they should. Should people focus on their influence and what they are doing and what they're feeling? Yes, they should.
Right.
Should they live in the present and believe that they can change? Yes, they should. Should they cut on feedback and not really care about others and not competing? Probably yes, they should. So like on every point, I get this yes. But then like, well, wait a second. Like how actually can I be useful if I complete the first points?
Right. Yeah, I think that was also a thing for me. It felt like, this is a nice, interesting model or interesting set of concepts and interesting set of principles. And as such, like they kind of discuss them in the book, but then when you start applying that to very specific and concrete situations that you have in your life or you remember you had some time ago, it becomes not as clear of a cut on how to navigate those situations given all of those principles, because they are not mutually exclusive in a mathematical sense, right? So you would inevitably come into situations where one principle would say you do X and another one would say do Z, and X and Z will be in contradiction with one another. And then one would have to, I guess, exercise their own judgment and not be bound by previous trauma, past experiences, and not be bound by what other people might think of them, and just make a leap of faith and decide how they go forward and maybe learn from that, hopefully.
For me, most of the, I would say Aristotle's approach to psychology was mostly about trying to be rational and trying to be social. Like these two concepts, they're kind of similar to what is described here. Like you want to keep rationality and not get too much into the emotions. Even when they arise, you should probably somehow filter them. And then when you turn on your rationality, you should direct it into some kind of social good or service or whatever. So on the high level, it works. By the way, I was meaning to ask you, do you think the second book is similar and consistent to the others? Because I haven't listened to that one. And
I think that the second book, I would say that it was some time ago, but I think the impression I remember that it didn't quite live up to my expectations. But if you press me, I would not be able to explain why specifically that was.
That's fine, because Audible suggested that I get this one after, and I'm still hesitant. So if you were not excited and thrilled about it, probably I shouldn't.
I think, and this one as well, to an extent, this courage to be disliked even just as a concept, as this courage to be like these four words seemed like appealing enough of an idea for me, for some of my kind of sort of challenges and thinking that I have in my own life. And that was also one of the reasons why I picked up this book anyway, after kind of dismissing it initially. I would say it didn't quite live up to my expectations there as well, because they used this courage to be disliked only maybe a handful of times throughout that book, and maybe as many times they used the idea of courage to be happy, because I guess this courage to be disliked is connected to one's ability to be happy in the end of the day. So kind of maybe sort of answered some of the questions or things I had in mind picking up that book. And I feel it seems to me that Courage to Be Happy in the second book was also discussed in a sort of not entirely satisfactory way to live up to my personal, very individual expectations.
Sure. As you were mentioning these courages to be disliked and to be happy, I kind of remember the third courage that I find specifically useful in this book. It's courage to be normal.
Mm-hmm.
They introduced a concept that is sometimes actually okay not to be unique,
mm-hmm.
leading, special. First, it's okay to be average in some situations. And in our society, when we kind of learn that you have to be standing out, you have to do what you do best, or you have to achieve what no one has achieved. For me personally, it's a big lesson, and since childhood, I've always wanted to do stuff that nobody can, and tried to be this, different. I think that a lot of children are raised that way in the past few generations.
Right.
And they suggest quite a controversial idea that it's okay to be normal, like to be like everyone in certain cases, like to have an average education grade, to have average anything, physical shape as well. And I can see that this idea actually makes me happier than I was before I got it. And it kind of gave me the right words for it, because previously I would just sense it, but I wasn't able to shape it, especially in conversations with others.
Totally. I also like this idea in the book, and kind of found it to be liberating in a sense. I think as you described, maybe I have been dancing around this idea without being able to express it precisely, and kind of my reasoning for that was one, like two things that I had in my mind. Like, one was that each of us kind of is unique because all of us have unique DNA, like for starters, and all of us have our own unique path of life that we've gone through, which shaped who we are as a person, and that's not repeatable. We are all unique in our own way, and like, do we really need to be even more unique on top of that? Like, is it healthy or something along those lines? And another idea was kind of a joke that if you are such that you are 1 in a million, then in China there is 1,500 people like you, and it's like you usually say like, well, like 1 in a million is like unique, but then if you extrapolate that to entire population on the human population on Earth, you turn on, a whole bunch of like entire crowd of people who would be like you. So is it worth it? And I guess Courage to Be Normal is a great way to articulate and pinpoint this idea. Because if you, I guess, it's a good one.
And for me, it's kind of a question whether our brains are actually wired that way, like whether we can do it. Because I think that you would have to live in very humiliating environment to actually say like, well, I'm nothing special. It even sounds depressive sometimes. But then you look at the statistics of our today's modern population, and guess what? An average person considers oneself smarter than an average person. And an average person considers oneself luckier than an average person. And you can basically change an adjective and say that we think more of ourselves. And in some cases, it's true. But usually, like, I can be, I don't know, smarter than a bunch of people in specific field or in specific domain. But then guess what? These guys are much smarter than me in a whole bunch of other things and things I can't even pronounce because I don't know them.
This is very 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 interesting, and I think that kind of in a professional setting, it connects to the idea of, how do we call it, like T-shaped team members or something like that. Like we want people who are very good at something on our team, and have a team that has people that are good in different things, which kind of allows them to be kind of normal and unique in their own way. There is one idea, though, which I don't know how to explain, but I had a feeling, I felt that idea when listening to the book kind of both times, and I had that exact feeling now as we discuss this courage to be normal, and when you said that it is difficult to actually practice that. It's controversial, but if you manage, I guess the way I feel, like if you manage to do that, like good things are going to happen to you just by ways of you kind of living or accepting that you are good enough. And the closest way to expressing this idea is like that would be an idea of transitioning to the sort of next level, like where nothing maybe changes visually or externally, but something changes in a very material way, so that you can go further or do more. Something along the lines as if you are, how do you, like when you go on a ride, right? And like you can go like with bigger and bigger and bigger amplitude up all the way up until the point when you can make a full circle, and kind of this whole pattern of going back and forth kind of disrupts, but then it again goes into this back and forth, and that sort of transition is something that kind of I felt like discussing the community feeling, in a sense that you first become self-reliance, and then through that you can get that community feeling because you can trust other people to do things in a way that would be, you can trust them to also have that community feeling and have your interests in them. And similarly with being normal, if you deprive or you depart from this desire to be unique and instead agree to be normal, you kind of come to the next level of uniqueness because you can harness your special abilities and your passions and so on and so forth without being that the drive that sort of propels you forward.
There's one thing that kind of makes me cautious about what you're saying, that basically the benefit of being normal is getting more unique, which is counterintuitive.
I guess that's probably not what I'm saying directly. It's not the benefit when you, I guess the way I'm imagining it is that when you become okay with being normal.
Okay, maybe not the word benefit, outcome.
Right. The outcome would be that the side effect of that would be that you can be maybe more unique without even trying to be more unique in the first place, right? If you agree that, well, I'm a kind of mediocre or like not I'm an average writer. I don't need to be the best. I don't need to be next Tolkien or John Rowling or Hemingway or something like that. Let me just, I'm fine as I am. I love writing. Let me focus on that. And then when you focus on your love of writing and you write, you can, as a result of that, be seen by other people as a oh wow, like that's amazing, that's next level writing, without you even trying to get there directly, if you know what I'm trying to say, which you probably don't.
Mm-hmm. I think I feel it a bit differently, because I think that this courage to be normal is more of a process of peeling the illusions. Like when you consider what other people think about you, when you estimate your own, I don't know, wealth, health, and whatever else, comparing to the others, you waste quite a lot of energy and time there. And when you are able to see who you are, the way you are, without illusions, like, people, when they look into the mirror, they see not just themselves, but also the projection, or who they would like to become in the future, or who they used to be. And like just the plain process of looking into the mirror is a good illustration here. And if you look in the mirror and you see just what's in the mirror, it kind of frees up a lot of space, mind space, for you to do other stuff. And this other stuff could be whatever you choose. And I think that for me, it's like a big source of energy. Like if you don't have to be in this chase, in this competition, or calculating and overthinking a lot of stuff, well, guess what? You could use this mental energy elsewhere, and hopefully for something useful.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And to be honest, to me, it feels like what you just described as is actually a description for what I was trying to say would work. How that thing would come to be. That proverbial getting to the next level by freeing up a lot of mental capacity, you can then apply it to something that's arguably more meaningful. Even though if the Adlerian psychology denies the need to praise or pass judgment on stuff.
Well, Adler would say you just didn't get the community feeling yet.
Yes, you need to work harder.
You have to practice Adlerian psychology twice your life. Yeah, if you're 40, you should practice for another 80 years to become a master.
They said half, no?
Half?
Yeah, I think they said you have to practice, like, in order to fully get it, you have to...
It was 2, but was it divided or multiplied?
So, like, yeah, basically they were saying that if you are, like, 40, it will take you 20 years to fully grasp the Adlerian psychology.
That makes sense.
Like, one other thing, like, one other gripe I had with the book, and since we started talking about it, Adlerian psychology and stuff, and using this term so much, is like the very fact that they were using the word Adlerian psychology, or Adler says, or Adler said, or Adler this, or Adler that. I kind of that always rubs me the wrong way, because being kind of an engineer and stuff like that, I find it hard to believe that even the greatest ideas that Adler may have had, I think he lived in 19th century, something like that, or like on the verge of 19th and 20th century, maybe. I find it hard to believe that those ideas were not refined or improved by other people, and kind of referring to them as Adlerian or Adler said that. Like, yeah, that's great that Adler said that hundreds of years ago. Like, did anyone say anything more useful in that area since then? Like, probably yes. I'd love to hear from those people. And I think, like, in science and engineering, it is more common when ideas become generally accepted, and like good ideas that others build on, they lose that kind of inventor connotation, and we start referring to them as just theory of relativity. We don't kind of attribute, well, yes, Einstein was the pioneer, and he did a lot of to progress this field, but we don't refer to it as a Einsteinian theory. We refer to it as theory of relativity because a lot of people after that contributed to that field and extended our understanding. And likewise, I think in Adlerian psychology, which has a Wikipedia article which says individual psychology, not Adlerian psychology, and there were other scholars who developed this idea. So this was one other thing that I didn't quite like about the book, and it indeed had that feeling of kind of religiousness or something like that. Like Adler says this, and therefore we do it this way, worship Adler and stuff like that.
Actually, to my own surprise, I will come to defend this saying, because if I understood correctly, when this person quoted Adler, it was part of a writing or a book or something. It was a direct word. When there was the phrase Adlerian psychology, it actually means interpretations and adaptations of other scholars that were working there. The fact that they were not using the term individual psychology, but they were using this, I don't remember the term,
teleology and etiology.
Yeah. Like the other concepts that they were applying. Basically, I think it was just a simplification. Like not to say all the authors and all the concepts and people who contributed. They probably tried to generalize it to Adlerian psychology. But to me, it was quite clear that when they would say Adler says, it was a quote of Adler originally, and it was in Adlerian psychology, we believe, or people believe, it meant that it was a work of some of the disciples.
Interesting. I think that they mentioned several times that Adlerian psychology is more about has a strong individualism angle to it, and maybe they even use this as individual psychology as a term. Maybe they authors or the translator decided not to go with that because individual psychology sounds like way too generic and might confuse readers. Yep, I get this point. It makes sense. Still, I guess I maybe would sort of appreciate it, references to other scholars in the field, but I guess we get what we get.
Well, you could always read the original Japanese book and see what's there. Or you can't, because you're an average Ukrainian who speaks English and doesn't speak Japanese.
No, I speak Japanese. I can tell you arigato.
Domo arigato gozaimasu.
So we speak with average Ukrainians who speak Japanese.
Like all three words I know. maybe some titles as well.
That's a matter of definition. Did you speak the Japanese that? Yes, so you speak Japanese.
Below average? Yeah.
No. We are not passing judgment on this in this podcast.
Which we might on the next one, because our next episode is going to be a guest episode, and we will not spoil who is coming, but I think it should be fun.
Right? Yeah. It's always fun. So, but maybe just should we pass a little bit of judgment for our listeners and kind of conclude with answering the question: is it worth it? Should they read this book or listen to it? Should they invest how many 8 maybe hours of their precious time into this work of philosophy and fiction and everything?
In my opinion, yes, for 2 possible reasons. 1, to practice critical thinking. 2, to look for inspiration. And if you're not looking for an entire system, but a separate idea or insight, then this book might bring you one. But if you're looking for a system that could change your way of thinking and mindset and life, then probably that's not the way. What do you think?
Yep, same here. I would also recommend listening/reading this book, and I think the ideas there can be useful, and it kind of depends on what you take out of that. But at least for me, I found at least couple of things that I want to keep in mind as I go through life.
And you will probably hear about them in the follow-ups for our next episodes. Or maybe not. We'll see.
Maybe not. Yeah, we will see in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, hopefully good ones.